You just knew that if I did a top 10 Genesis co-op games, that I'd do it for the Super Nintendo as well. What's cool about it is that each console had so many great exclusives, and that carried over to co-op games as well, though there are still some cross-platform games. And of course, we all know that sometimes co-op games are more fun than versus games because you can work together instead of getting all pissed off and competitive with each other. For this top 10, I've got some games that you would expect, as well as some games you may not be thinking of. I'm maybe bending the rules a little bit for a couple of the games, but just trust me, they're all awesome games and I'm excited to talk about them. So with that, let's jump right into it with number 10, which would be Kirbys Superstar. Now, this is a Super Nintendo game that people are well aware of, but not everybody thinks about playing it in two-player mode. The way you do it is by sucking up an enemy, absorbing its power, as Kirby does, but then you can turn your power into a buddy and let them play alongside you. Kirby is an easy game, so this might be a good one to play with somebody who doesn't play a lot of games. And having two players in this one makes it especially easy because you can just mow through all the enemies. Next on the list, we've got Donkey Kong Country 2 at number 9. And just hear me out on this one because a lot of people don't actually consider this to be co-op since you take turns switching between characters. You can switch at any time with the press of a button, and it makes the incentive to find those DK barrels all the more important since you're literally bringing your friend back into the game when you do so. Both players have to stay on their toes, because if one player dies, the other player will immediately be thrust into the action and need to continue playing. Plus, it can be fun to decide which player is better at which kinds of sections, and it creates a real strategy element amongst each other as far as how you want to tackle each of the stages. Oh, and not to mention, it's one of the greatest 2D platformers ever made, so that's helpful, right? Next up, we've got Lost Vikings at number 8, a game I recommended for Genesis as well, and this is a game that's made better with co-op because you can now go from switching between 3 different characters to being able to play as 2 of them at the same time, one for each character. And sure, a 3-player mode would have been even better, but having 2 players is pretty sweet, and you can still switch to the 3rd Viking at any time. You'll need a lot of communication and teamwork because each Viking has different abilities that you'll need to utilize in order to progress through. If you have a buddy whose brain works really well with yours, this is a great game to play with them and can be immensely satisfying to solve your way through. Next up, we've got one that not a lot of people talk about, and that would be Biker Mice from Mars at number 7. Now, if you've never heard of this before, you might just be thinking, okay, this sounds like complete nonsense. But you gotta remember that this is based off a cartoon during a time when Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were all the rage. So an IP like this was fair game. While you technically race against each other, you are more importantly racing against all of the computer characters, and you need to place well enough to advance to the next rounds. So the way to make this a more fun co-op game is by trying to screw over the computer players but not each other. Naturally, you will inevitably hurt each other on accident, but that's part of the challenge. It's a battle racer, so you have lots of fun items and weapons you can use to help you jockey for position. Also, fun fact, but this is actually my favorite racing game on the system due to its very arcadey, pick up and play type of feel. It takes a minute to figure out the controls, but once you've got it, it's pretty simple and you'll be having a blast. Number 6 on the list is Zombies Ate My Neighbors. It's got a goofy title to honor campy horror films and does a great job of making various references throughout. This is a game you often see people playing around Halloween time, and while it's enjoyable by yourself, adding a second player is a lot of fun. One thing some people complain about that I actually like is that the co-op mode forces you to stay on the same screen. I like this because it makes you and your teammates stay on the same page, since one player isn't allowed to go wandering off somewhere far away. You've got to work together, and I think this really helps the teamwork aspect of the game, requiring constant communication. Deciding how to navigate the stages, who picks up which items and weapons, all that good stuff as you blast away zombies and try to find all the neighbors in each stage. At number 5, we've got Contra III, and this is a game everybody expected to see show up on this list, and rightly so. One of the best games for the console, and naturally one of the best co-op games as well. The big thing here is that the Contra games are challenging, so having two players who are good at this game can be really satisfying, since you've got that extra firepower to mow down all the enemies with. Keep in mind though that Contra has platforming elements to it as well, so those sections are naturally going to be more difficult since you now have two players to make it through the obstacles instead of just one. Next on the list, we've got Sunset Riders at number 4. Some people may not agree with this being higher than Contra, and I can understand that, but this has a little more of a lighthearted feel to it, which I find is more conducive to co-op play. I've always found the Western theme for video games to be a really fun setting. This game really keys in on the inner gunslinger inside of all of us. You've got different characters to choose from, and similar to Contra, that extra firepower from adding a second player will really help, and the gameplay here mostly focuses on trying to gun everything down. Sure, you'll have to dodge tons of gunfire and the game can really ramp up in difficulty, but the game starts off straightforward enough and is a pretty sure bet to have a fun time with a buddy. The only issue you might have is who gets to be Cormano, because he's obviously the best character. Okay, number 3 is Wild Guns. That's right, we're sticking with the Western theme, and this game feels arguably even more arcade-like than Sunset Riders, despite not being an arcade game originally. That's right, this game was built from the ground up for the Super Nintendo. This game is what's often referred to as a gallery shooter, and the idea is pretty simple. You move your character left and right while trying to shoot everything on screen. You do have some abilities to help you out though, like a dodge roll, double jump, lasso that can freeze enemies, and you can also pick up different weapons that really give you an advantage. The music is super up-tempo and thematically appropriate, really driving the action of this game and providing a fun atmosphere for you and a friend. Can't recommend this game for 2 players highly enough, and if you're wondering, it was re-released on more modern consoles as Wild Guns Reloaded, so you don't have to mess around with the high-priced original cartridge if you don't want to. At number 2, we've got Turtles in Time. This might be the most obvious choice on the entire list, and for good reason. Beat 'em ups just naturally make good co-op games due to their pick-up and play nature, and this is one of the most iconic ones ever made. I think what makes it stick out so much is how often the game introduces and reintroduces different elements into the gameplay, whether it be new enemies, environmental hazards, and even gameplay mechanics. Plus, getting to choose between the 4 turtles, each with their own different weapons, is just awesome. And Ninja Turtles just has a super fun vibe going for it by default. Whether it's the pizza, catchphrases, or colorful art style, you're gonna have a blast playing this game with a friend. Alright, but number 1 on my list is Goof Troop, baby. Oh yes, some of you may be confused right now, but anybody who has played this game co-op before knows exactly what I'm talking about.
Talk to me, baby!
If you're wondering, that's a clip from the Goofy movie based off of Goof Troop. Anyways, the quickest way I can get all of you on board with this game is to tell you that this game was designed by Shinji Mikami, who was also responsible for Capcom classics like Resident Evil, the remake, and Resident Evil 4. That's right, before those masterpieces, he was working on making one of the best 16-bit co-op games you'll find. What makes the game so fun is how well it incorporates action with puzzle solving. You and your friend are always on the same screen, which avoids any sort of camera issues, and the game clearly takes a lot of inspiration from the Zelda games, giving the game a really satisfying hook as you solve the puzzles. You constantly feel rewarded, and it's just the kind of game you want to keep playing. I played this game for like 3 hours straight with a good friend of mine. Don't let the fact that this is a licensed game fool you. This was made by Capcom at their prime, and some of their best talent was working on it. Alright, so that does it for my list, and now's the part where we talk about what didn't make the list. Probably the biggest thing missing would be Secret of Mana. That's a great game, and you can even play it with up to 3 players co-op if you have a multi-tap. But I should mention that it's an RPG, so while that's very unique and awesome, you'll need a friend who is very dedicated to play through something so involved, and you need to progress to a certain point in the game before you can add other players. Still, definitely check it out if you have a friend who's up for it. Also, if you have a Super Nintendo Classic Edition, you'll notice that only a couple of the games from my list are on that, so yeah, you'll want to look into how to add more games to it if you can. As for some of the other games missing, that's where I'm gonna leave it to you, the viewers, to list some of the games down in the comments. Again, any game not listed here is probably something I'm aware of, but it's still helpful to have down in the comments since people are going to be coming to this video looking for recommendations. And of course, let me know what you think of my list itself since opinions will vary from person to person. With that said, be sure to leave those comments and I will see ya in the next video.